Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Billy Hollowell, and today I'm joined by Jon Brown of the Christian Post, and we've got a lot to talk about. At the center of our conversation is Baylor University down in Waco, Texas, and this $643,401 grant from a liberal foundation that has caused quite a stir. Jon, how you doing today?
I'm good, Billy. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. There's a lot to unpack here. This has been sort of a winding story with a lot of ins and outs that have unfolded. But let's just start with this grant. It was over $643,000. What was the grant for, and who awarded it to the university?
So the grant came from what it's called the Eula and Jon Baugh Foundation. It's a nonprofit. It's known for backing progressive, inclusive Christian causes. The money was meant for Baylor's, it's called the Center for Church and Community Impact. And so that's within their School of Social Work. And it was to fund a study researching how LGBTQ individuals and women can experience exclusion in churches sometimes, according to them. And the ultimate goal was to create resources, so called, to help these congregations be more inclusive. And so the original announcement, I have the quote here, it said the goal was to, quote, create a safe, inclusive, and supportive environment for everyone in their community.
So that would essentially mean creating more of a progressive environment inside of churches, essentially. I mean, it sounds like that was the goal of this grant.
Yeah, I would say that would be a good conclusion to make.
Okay, so let's just start with why Baylor accepted it. Do we have any understanding of why the university first chose to say, okay, well, we'll take this money for this? Obviously, when you're talking about a faith-based institution, the question's going to be, well, why would you take that money to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's the one that's raised a lot of eyebrows, but it makes sense given the liberal causes that the Baugh Foundation has supported for years to think that there are perhaps many people in the faculty who lean left. And what's important to remember is that the school has to apply for these grants. So this idea came from within the school. That's something that the foundation pointed out when the school returned the money. So I think the larger concern is how much of Baylor is being co-opted by people in the institution who have no biblical worldview at all and are trying to undermine it.
Well, okay, and you just brought up the other part of this story, right? So they take the money, the $643,401. Then there's a public outcry. Talk a little bit about the public outcry, because you covered this. This became a big story, and then we'll get into they returned the money. But what was the initial reaction when it became public that Baylor had taken this grant?
Well, it blew up. It became a huge it got a lot of backlash on social media to the point where Baylor's president, Linda Livingstone, hard to say, she makes about $2 million a year. She's the second highest paid Christian university president. She said in a statement that that they're going to give the money back, and that the issue, she said, wasn't the research itself, but the activities that followed as part of the grant. She specifically pointed out that the grant's scope veered into advocating for views on sexuality that went against the school's own statement on the issue, which calls for purity and singleness and fidelity in marriage. And so she said in her statement, which she couched in a lot of strange ways, that it wasn't the grant itself, it was the consequences of the grant. But as Megan Basham pointed out in a thread, Baylor's been getting grants from this foundation to promote these liberal causes for years, and I just think they got caught this time.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible that a leader of an institution, a university, might not know every single grant that's coming in. They may not know, but you would assume if this has been an ongoing sort of funding stream that there was some awareness of it. But it sounds like they realized, I mean, they returned the money. So it sounds like they realized, oh no, this is a bad PR move. People are really upset, and this could actually affect our bottom line. Was there anything in her statement that addressed that? Clearly you don't give the money back. If you're going to take a firm stance, you take the firm stance, unless you're afraid it's going to hurt you in some way. So I'm assuming that there was some fear there that this was going to hurt Baylor.
Well, of course, she didn't say that they were being threatened financially, but I think it's safe to assume that that was what was going on, because as you said, this was not a new story. This was a story that was percolating for days, and they didn't deal with it until it became a huge, huge PR problem.
So let's talk about the grant provider, because obviously this is, a provider that is progressive and has given money for that purpose. What reaction did we get, if any, from them after the Baylor pulled out and returned the money?
Well, they weren't happy, to put it mildly. They issued an extensive statement, multiple pages. And it's important to understand this foundation, the Baugh Foundation, it was named after two longtime Baylor donors. They've since passed away, but they've been giving the school tons of money over the years. In their statement, they said they were deeply saddened by the fact that Baylor gave the money back. They said it was a disservice to the students and the faculty and the broader Christian community. And they also accused the school of kowtowing to an online campaign of fear and misinformation is the term I think they used. And they accused it of undermining academic freedom, all the buzzwords that these foundations like to use. But another thing that they said is that Baylor was abandoning its duty to abandoning its Christian call to care for the marginalized. And they also implied that this school would not be getting much money from them anymore, if at all, which is actually kind of a huge deal for them.
Well, yeah, and in fairness to this foundation, regardless of whether people agree or disagree with the aims of the grant giving that they're putting out there, as you were saying before, you have to seek these grants out. So that Baylor sought the grant out, they received it, then they return it. So the foundation obviously was just doing what they do; they give money out when it's requested, and so it's interesting that they put out such a large statement as a result of this. What about Baylor faculty and students? Obviously, the community there, I would imagine we've all become well aware of this. I'm sure they have too. Are there any reactions from faculty or students that are worth noting?
Well, this actually gets into the larger point of what triggered this whole thing to happen in the first place, because the story that I wrote the day that statement came out, I was working on a piece, and I published a piece for about a Baylor English professor. His name's Greg Garrett. He had really nothing to do with the grant, but he posted in support of it after some stories were being published about it. And then he went after me personally. He went after Megan Basham, and he went after Protestia, a popular Christian X account. And he accused us of attacking his faith just for reporting some of the stuff that he said. He made headlines last year about it. He had a Harry Potter class, and he talked about how he and his students were talking about how J.K. Rowling's transphobic. And so I did some digging into him, and I found out that he goes to a church that celebrates Pride Month. And he has all these posts suggesting that anyone who doesn't affirm that is hateful and disobeying Jesus. And he himself got a grant of almost $500,000 to study how America promotes racism from that foundation. And so there's an example of a faculty member who is being very public about how he supports this stuff. And I think that really blew open the fact that Baylor has a lot of potentially unbiblical stuff going on in their leadership. And so I think, there haven't been a lot of faculty weighing in. This guy obviously has tenure, but I think it does raise the question, like, again, as I said, how deep does this go?
Yeah, well, and that's that kind of brings me to my final question for you too, because there's a lot obviously happening here. And when you have Christian universities, we already have so many discussions going on about how universities in general are compromised on various secular views and progressive views. When you have Christian universities falling under prey of that, there then becomes bigger questions. Why do you think it's important to be covering stories like this one?
I think a lot of Christians would find this story important because I think it gets to the heart of what our cultural and spiritual war is that we're going through. There is so much institutional rot at all levels of our culture, and that sadly it goes for a lot of the Christian culture too. So many of these Christian institutions and churches are caving on sexuality, especially, and probably most importantly, and they're crumbling. And I think that this story really shows that it often gets down to money. And sadly, promoting sin is often a lot more lucrative than the alternative. And Christians and institutions are going to have to decide, who are we going to serve? And I think that's what this story is an example of.
Well, that's a big question that all of us need to be asking. Who are we going to serve? And it's a perfect place for us to close here today. Jon, as always, appreciate your work and showing up today.
Thank you, Billy.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to the Christian Post, christianpost.com. Check out all the news there daily. And as for this show, we'll be back again next week.